Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through today's topic because honestly, we're looking at one of the most elegant, highly structured systems in all of human biology. I want you to think of your body's endocrine system as a massive, global delivery network. It's this intricately coordinated biological postal service where hormones are basically the chemical letters keeping us alive, functioning, and in perfect balance. We're going to decode exactly how these messages are written, sent, and ultimately received. Okay, so let's dive right in by defining how our cells actually talk to each other. Because, not all messages travel the exact same distance. We've got long-distance endocrine signaling, where hormones are dumped directly into the bloodstream to reach organs on the totally opposite side of the body. Then you've got paracrine signaling. This is way more local. Think of it like a neighborhood chat across the fence with adjacent cells. And finally, autocrine signaling, where a cell releases a factor that acts right back on itself. It's essentially the biological equivalent of leaving a sticky note on your own front door. So here is our quick roadmap for the explainer. We're going to cover 1. The body's messaging system. 2. Synthesis and safe transport. 3. Receptors, making the delivery. 4. When signals misfire. And finally, 5. The master feedback loop. Let's get right into it. Starting off with Section 1, the body's messaging system. To really grasp endocrinology, we have to figure out how to categorize the literally millions of chemical messengers buzzing through your bloodstream right at this very second. And the absolute core rule of biological signaling is this: a hormone's physical properties completely dictate how it behaves. Specifically, its solubility dictates its receptor type. We can lump all hormones into 5 distinct structural classes: amino acid derivatives, small neuropeptides, large proteins, steroid hormones, and vitamin derivatives. If you look closely, you'll notice how a hormone's solubility perfectly aligns with exactly where it's allowed to bind. So the really crucial point here is that water-soluble hormones, like your peptides and large proteins, they're completely blocked by the cell's fatty outer membrane. They literally just can't get inside. Because of that, they absolutely must use surface membrane receptors to pass their message along. On the flip side, lipid-soluble hormones, like steroids, are right at home in fat, so they just slip right on through that cell membrane and travel all the way into the intracellular space to bind with nuclear receptors. But, as any good biologist knows, nature absolutely loves an exception, and you definitely need to remember this fascinating plot twist. Thyroid hormone is an amino acid derivative. So, based on our rules, it should be water-soluble and use a surface membrane receptor, right? Well, it doesn't. It is actually highly lipid-soluble, and it paradoxically bypasses the membrane altogether to act directly on a nuclear receptor that's already waiting for it inside the nucleus. All right, moving right along to Section 2, synthesis and safe transport. Now that we know what the messengers actually are, let's look at how these hormones are packaged and transported safely through the chaotic highway of the bloodstream. You see, the body is ridiculously efficient. It doesn't always bother building just one hormone at a time. Instead, it often creates this massive single pro-hormone precursor and then basically chops it up into multiple active products. For instance, POMC gets cleaved to make ACTH, MSH, and beta-endorphin. And look at proinsulin. When the body chops that up, it yields the active hormone insulin, plus this byproduct called C-peptide. Why does that matter to us? Well, measuring C-peptide is actually the perfect diagnostic marker to prove a patient's own pancreas is naturally producing insulin. It's super useful. Okay, so once they're actually secreted into the bloodstream, how do these hormones survive the trip? They travel in the blood in one of 2 ways. They can be down to specialized carrier proteins, things like TBG or SHBG, which essentially act as a safe, inactive storage reservoir. Or they can travel completely free and unbound. Now listen, here is the absolute golden rule you have to take away from this. Only the free, unbound hormone is biologically active and capable of actually delivering its message to a cell. The real-world clinical stakes of this bound versus free dynamic are actually fascinating. Think about a patient with polycystic ovary syndrome, or PCOS. If that patient develops insulin resistance, it actually causes the liver to drop its production of the carrier protein SHBG. Now, with fewer carriers available in the blood, the amount of free, biologically active testosterone inappropriately spikes. And that uncorrected spike in free testosterone is exactly why PCOS causes symptoms like hirsutism. It's all connected. Now, these transport mechanisms drastically affect a hormone's half-life, meaning just how long it actually survives in circulation. Take the thyroid hormone T4, for example. thanks to its specific binding proteins, it has a massive 7-day half-life. Because it sticks around for so long, it takes over a month to reach a steady state in the body, which is incredibly convenient for patients because it means they really only need to take their thyroid medication once a day. But you can contrast that massive 7-day survival with parathyroid hormone, or PTH. PTH vanishes from the bloodstream in under 20 minutes, literally. Now, while that might sound wildly inefficient at first, it is actually a brilliant physiological feature. Because it clears out so incredibly fast, surgeons can measure PTH levels while a patient is still literally on the operating table. This lets them instantly confirm they've successfully removed a hyperactive parathyroid adenoma. How cool is that? Okay, Section 3, receptors, making the delivery. We've tracked the delivery trucks through the bloodstream. Now let's examine these cellular mailboxes. These are the actual receptors where the message is ultimately received and read. Now, for those lipid-soluble hormones that slip right into the nucleus, they don't just float around aimlessly. They bind directly to the DNA using these highly conserved 2 zinc finger domains. But they actually divide into 2 separate camps. Type 1 receptors, which are used by steroids, form homodimers, meaning 2 identical receptors pair up on the DNA. Meanwhile, type 2 receptors, which are used by thyroid hormone and vitamin D, form heterodimers. This means they pair up with a completely different receptor called RXR to get the job done. Meanwhile, out at the surface of the cell, our water-soluble hormones are doing some heavy lifting with G-protein-coupled receptors. Let's break down this notoriously complex G-protein cycle into 4 really simple steps. First, an external hormone binds the GPCR, which causes an inactive GDP molecule to fall right off the G-alpha subunit inside the cell. Next, a fresh, high-energy GTP binds in its place, activating that G-alpha subunit. Finally, it breaks away to trigger enzymes like adenylate cyclase. It is just this gorgeous mechanical relay race, showing us exactly how a hormone on the outside flips a biochemical switch deep inside the cell. Moving right along to Section 4, when signals misfire. So, what exactly happens when those mailboxes are broken, or the switches get jammed? Looking at the high-yield clinical pitfalls of GPCRs brilliantly illustrates a really core concept in pathology. A loss-of-function mutation literally causes cellular deafness, or resistance. A prime example is when a broken TSH receptor causes congenital hypothyroidism. Conversely, a gain-of-function mutation leaves that biochemical switch permanently stuck in the on position, without even needing a hormone around at all. For instance, a GS-alpha gain-of-function causes unchecked growth hormone release, resulting in acromegaly. And an LH receptor stuck in the on position, that drives male-limited precocious puberty. Let's move over to some other cellular pathways, like tyrosine and cytokine receptors, and see how this builds. If the growth hormone cytokine receptor mutates, it causes Larn dwarfism. And this creates a truly fascinating, paradoxical clinical picture. See, the patient has sky-high levels of growth hormone in their blood, but because the receptor is totally deaf to it, there is absolutely no downstream production of the growth factor IGF-1. The message is literally being shouted at the cell, but the cell simply cannot hear it. And inside the nucleus, a broken receptor is equally disastrous. Just consider a loss-of-function mutation in the X-linked androgen receptor. This leads to androgen insensitivity syndrome. In this condition, a patient with XY male chromosomes presents with a completely female physical phenotype. Why? Because even though their body is producing high levels of testosterone, the nuclear mailboxes are completely broken. The testosterone messages literally cannot be read by the DNA. It's wild. Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, the master feedback loop. Now, you might be wondering, how does the body keep this entire massive, powerful communication network from just spiraling completely out of control? The answer is strict regulation. Almost every single endocrine axis relies on a negative feedback loop to maintain balance. Think of it exactly like a thermostat in your house. When the room gets too hot, the heat turns off. High cortisol turns off ACTH, high calcium turns off PTH. It's a beautifully simple system. But there is one spectacular high-yield exception, the mid-cycle rise in estrogen. Instead of turning the system off, rising estrogen triggers a massive positive feedback LH surge, and that is exactly what triggers ovulation. And you have to look at this incredible localized safety mechanism. The mineralocorticoid receptor in the kidney binds aldosterone to retain sodium. But here's the catch. It accidentally binds cortisol with just as much affinity. And since we have way more cortisol in our blood than aldosterone, why aren't our kidneys just constantly overwhelmed? Enter the renal bouncer, an enzyme called 11-beta-HSD2. This guy sits right in the renal tubules and constantly inactivates cortisol the very second it arrives. This ensures it doesn't accidentally overwhelm those receptors and cause massive, dangerous sodium retention. All right, we're nearing the end here, and this quote really captures the overarching lesson of endocrinology. It is not just about the message itself. It is entirely about the rhythm of the delivery. For receptors to stay healthy and responsive, hormones like GnRH must be delivered in pulses. Pulsatile delivery keeps those receptors sensitive and listening. But if you flood the receptors with a continuous, never-ending stream of the hormone, it deafens them completely. It causes total cellular desensitization. Which brings us to the absolute genius of modern medicine and a question I'm going to leave you to ponder. If a continuous flood of a hormone deafens the receptor, how can we use that clinically? Think about it. If a patient has a condition driven by hormones, something like prostate cancer or precocious puberty, we don't always need to block the receptor. We can paradoxically give them a continuous long-acting GnRH agonist. By intentionally exploiting this biological rule of continuous desensitization, we can overwhelm the system, intentionally shut down hormone production, and actually treat the disease. It is literally the ultimate biological hack. Thank you so much for diving into the beautiful complexities of the endocrine system with me on this explainer. Keep asking questions and keep exploring.